I had always thought my father and I had a bond that nothing could break. Growing up, we were inseparable. He was my first mentor, my biggest supporter, and the one person I could always count on. Even as I built my career, taking on bigger architectural projects and earning accolades, my father was always there, his steady presence offering guidance and strength. Every celebration felt complete with him beside me, whether it was a small victory or a milestone. There was a quiet understanding between us, no words necessary, that we were each other's rock. Then she came along, Bianca Moreau. I remember the first time I met her. It was at one of my father's gallery events, a place where I'd always been able to rely on seeing him at his best, surrounded by friends and colleagues. He was a businessman with fine taste. But that night he was different. There was a glimmer in his eye when he introduced me to Bianca. Her charm was effortless, her elegance intoxicating. Bianca was everything I wasn't. Confident, poised, and, according to my father, the perfect match for him. A woman of refined taste with a sophisticated air, she seemed to fill every space she walked into. Her accent was like a melody, soft yet alluring, and every word she spoke seemed deliberate and well thought out. In the early days, I convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that maybe I was just being protective. I had always been my father's first priority. And now there was a woman who had suddenly entered our lives, occupying a space I wasn't sure I was ready to share. It felt like someone was encroaching on what had always been mine. Ours. But I kept my reservations to myself, believing that things would settle and that Bianca would be just another fleeting presence. But they didn't settle. They shifted, slowly and insidiously, like the quiet encroachment of a storm on a perfect sunny day. Over the next few months, I watched my father become more enamored with Bianca. He seemed to lose himself in her world, one that was filled with high society dinners, art auctions, and the endless stream of extravagant gifts. Bianca, always gracious and elegant, fit perfectly into this new rhythm, but I could feel something slipping away between my father and me. The phone calls grew fewer, our conversations shorter. When I did manage to see him, I noticed how his attention often drifted toward Bianca, as if every word she said had become a command, a call to which he eagerly responded. I started to feel like an outsider in my own home. Bianca, with her perfect smile and calculated gestures, began to slowly assert her presence in ways that felt almost imperceptible but undeniable. I wasn't invited to certain family dinners anymore. The things we once did together, like Sunday morning drives or working on his collection of vintage cars, became things of the past. In their place were trips Bianca had planned, places I wasn't included in. I remember the day I walked into our family estate to find Bianca discussing with Raphael the sale of the house. My father, who had always been so adamant about keeping the family home, the place where I grew up, had agreed to her plan. The house that had witnessed every birthday, every late-night conversation, every monumental moment in our lives was now a piece of property up for grabs. I stood in the doorway, dumbfounded, as Bianca casually sipped her tea, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "It's just a house, Raphael. We can find something more modern, more fitting for us," she said, her words so matter-of-fact, as though she were talking about nothing more than changing a light bulb. My stomach churned. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could speak, my father turned to me. His eyes didn't meet mine the way they used to. Instead, there was an uncomfortable distance between us, a chasm widening with every passing day. "Let's think about it, Natalia," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time for a change." Time for a change. Those words haunted me. It was as if everything I knew, everything that had made our relationship real, was suddenly disposable, and I wasn't ready to let go. It wasn't just the house. It was everything. Bianca began to take control of family traditions, suggesting new routines, new holidays, without me. She'd smile sweetly as she gently pushed me aside, her intentions hidden behind her charm. She was subtle, never overt, but I could see it. I could feel it in the air when I entered a room. There was a certain coldness in the way she looked at me, as if I was something to be tolerated, something that didn't fit in her perfect world. I tried to talk to my father about it, but each conversation felt more like a battle I couldn't win. The words that came out of my mouth were drowned out by the soft, persuasive tone of Bianca's influence. It's just a phase, I told myself. I'm being paranoid. He's still my dad. But as the months passed, it became harder to deny the truth. I overheard a conversation one evening that shattered the illusion I had so desperately clung to. Bianca was speaking with someone on the phone. I don't know who, but I could hear every word. I told Raphael we needed to make some changes. He's getting older. And I'm doing what's best for him, she said, her voice so sweet, so composed. Once the estate is sold, it'll be easier for us to move forward. Natalia's too attached to the past. She doesn't understand that it's time for a fresh start. A fresh start. The words echoed in my mind, and for the first time I saw Bianca for what she truly was. Someone who was carefully orchestrating her way into my father's life, using his vulnerabilities against him and manipulating him into her vision of the future. I had always admired my father's strength, but this was something else. He wasn't just caught in a new relationship. He was being pulled under by Bianca's grip, losing himself in the process. And the saddest part was, he didn't even seem to notice. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't about a new stepmother or a woman who had simply come into our lives. This was about Bianca taking control of everything: the estate, the family traditions, my place in it all. And she was doing it with the subtlety of someone who had perfected the art of manipulation. I knew one thing for certain: I had to protect what was mine. And this time I wasn't going to let her take it away without a fight. It started with a quiet afternoon, one of those moments when everything in the house feels still, and you can hear the faint hum of the world outside your window. I was going through some old family albums, trying to distract myself from the mounting tension between me and Bianca, when I came across a folder that wasn't there before. It was tucked away in a drawer in my father's study. A drawer that hadn't been touched in years. The folder wasn't marked, not with any obvious label anyway, but something about it felt different. I wasn't even sure what prompted me to open it. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right, but as soon as I flipped it open, my heart skipped a beat. There, staring back at me, was a draft of my father's will. It wasn't just any will, though. This was a version I hadn't seen before. A version that didn't include me. At least not in the way I expected. My name was there, yes, but it was buried at the very bottom, listed as a distant beneficiary of a small fraction of his estate. A small fraction. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the glaring absence of everything I had always assumed would be mine. The family estate, the house where I grew up, where my father had built his life, was left entirely to Bianca. It was as if I had never existed, as if I didn't matter. The betrayal hit me like a wave, a tidal force that knocked the breath out of my lungs. I stood there frozen, my fingers trembling on the paper. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. For a long time, I just stared at the words, unable to reconcile what I was reading with the man I had known my entire life. How could he do this? How could he let her erase me like this? I had always known that Bianca was manipulative, that her charm was a weapon. But this was something else. This was a calculated move. I could feel the walls closing in around me. My father's mind was being overtaken by someone who didn't care about him, someone who saw only an opportunity. And I was being erased from the narrative of my own life. I had to find out how this happened, and I would make sure the truth came to light, no matter what. As the days passed, I could feel the weight of the discovery hanging over me. But what struck me as most sinister was how Bianca seemed to be getting closer to my father, guiding his every decision, shaping his reality. It didn't take long for me to start noticing signs I had ignored before. Signs of his mental decline. He had always been sharp, his mind quick and calculating, but now his thoughts seemed disjointed. Small things started slipping through the cracks, forgotten appointments, misplaced documents, moments of confusion when I spoke with him. And yet, Bianca was always there, smoothing over his missteps with a practiced ease. I could see how she'd positioned herself in his life. Always present, always helpful, always the one to remind him of things he forgot. I soon discovered what I had been dreading. Bianca had been hiding Raphael's early-stage dementia diagnosis from everyone. Even me. She had been using it to her advantage, carefully controlling the narrative, influencing his decisions without anyone questioning her. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. Her quiet manipulation of his condition, her ability to sway him with such precision, it was all part of the plan. And the will. That was just the beginning. I couldn't let this go on. I had to expose what was happening, but I needed proof. Not just suspicions. I needed something concrete. I spent the next few days in a quiet, determined frenzy. I researched every angle I could think of. I contacted a few trusted friends in the legal field, consulted old family lawyers, and began to quietly gather information on my father's medical condition. All the while, I made sure Bianca was unaware of my movements. She was always around, always hovering, making it harder to breathe without feeling like someone was watching. Then I had an idea, a risky one, but it was the only option I had left. I decided to record Bianca. She was always so confident in her conversations, so assured that nothing could touch her. I needed to catch her off guard, to hear her admit what she had been doing behind closed doors. It was a night like any other when I finally got the opportunity. Bianca and my father were in the living room talking about yet another trip she had planned for them. I knew she'd be distracted, talking about her endless plans for their future. A future that didn't include me. I set up my phone on a low table, angled just right so that it wouldn't be obvious, and waited. The conversation began innocently enough, but then Bianca's tone shifted. She started speaking in a hushed voice, careful not to be overheard. "We need to make sure everything is in place before we move forward," Bianca said, her voice dripping with manipulation. "Raphael's mind isn't what it used to be. We need to make sure he's well taken care of, and that the will reflects our new reality. It'll be easier to manage the estate once the family's out of the picture." I held my breath, my fingers clutching the edge of the table as I listened. She went on, talking about changing the dynamics, about making sure I was kept at arm's length. Her words confirmed everything I had feared. Bianca was systematically cutting me out of the picture, and Raphael was none the wiser. "I've made sure to handle the paperwork, the details," Bianca continued. "Once the estate is sold and Raphael's financials are in order, there'll be no way for her to contest anything." Her words were like a dagger. I felt my chest tighten with fury and betrayal, but I knew I couldn't act just yet. The recording was everything, my only leverage. But that wasn't all I found. While I was poring over old family documents to prepare for a confrontation, I came across something that made my blood run cold. My father's prenuptial agreement with Bianca. At first, I wasn't sure what it meant. It seemed like a standard contract, a precaution for someone with significant assets. But as I read further, the clauses began to stand out. There were stipulations about the family estate, about Bianca's rights upon my father's passing, and about my exclusion from certain decisions. It was a goldmine. A weapon I hadn't even known existed. I wasn't sure if it would hold up in court, but it was a bargaining chip. Something I could use to negotiate, to expose Bianca for the liar she was. I wasn't finished yet, though. I needed something more. The final piece of the puzzle came when I hired a neurologist to evaluate my father. It was a delicate operation. One I had to handle with care. I couldn't afford to raise any suspicions. I arranged a private consultation with the doctor, ensuring my father wouldn't feel pressured or uncomfortable. The neurologist's findings confirmed my suspicions. Raphael's mental state was deteriorating, and he was being manipulated, his decisions clouded by his condition. The doctor's report was devastating, not just for my father, but for me. It proved that Bianca wasn't just exploiting my father's decline for financial gain. She was playing a long game, one where I wasn't even a part of the equation. But now I had everything I needed. I was ready to fight back. And this time, I wouldn't let her win. The family mediation had been set for weeks, but I'd been planning for months. It was the perfect moment to execute my plan. A carefully crafted trap that Bianca never saw coming. I knew she would walk into that room with the same smug confidence she always wore, that air of superiority, convinced that she had already won. But what she didn't know was that I had prepared a legal ambush she would never be able to recover from. As I sat in the cold, sterile conference room, I could almost hear the ticking of the clock as the minutes dragged on. My lawyer, an older man named Gregory, sat beside me, reviewing the final documents. Across from us, Bianca was seated with her lawyer, a tall man with sharp features, who had looked at me with disdain from the moment he arrived. And then there was my father, his mind clouded and distant, sitting silently next to Bianca. The weight of his deteriorating health hung over the room, but he seemed more concerned with comforting Bianca than with anything else. Bianca, always the picture of control, leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She was calm, too calm, as though she had everything in the bag. I could see it in her eyes, the belief that no matter what evidence I brought, no matter what happened, she was still going to win. I wasn't about to let her. Not this time. The mediator, a neutral third party, opened the session with a few formalities, asking each of us to state our positions. I was the first to speak. My voice was steady, though inside my heart was pounding in anticipation. "I'm here today," I began, my eyes flicking to Bianca briefly, "because my father's will, as it currently stands, does not reflect his true intentions. I believe that certain actions have been taken to manipulate him during a time when he's vulnerable, and I'm here to ensure that the truth comes to light." Bianca didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled politely, as if to say, "What can you possibly have on me?" "My client's position is simple," her lawyer interjected smoothly. "Raphael's will is a reflection of his wishes, and nothing more. Natalia's concerns are based on assumption and not evidence. This mediation is an attempt to cloud the truth." I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to remain calm. The time for words was over. It was time to show them the evidence. Gregory, my lawyer, nodded at me. The moment had come. "Your Honour," Gregory began, addressing the mediator, "I have several documents and recordings that will demonstrate the manipulation that took place here. First, we have a recording of a conversation in which Bianca herself confesses to manipulating Raphael's estate and deliberately isolating his daughter." A hush fell over the room as Gregory played the tape. I held my breath, watching Bianca's reaction. It started with her voice, smooth and calculated, describing how she'd taken control of Raphael's financial matters. She spoke about keeping me out of the loop, how she had subtly worked to push me away from the family, all while claiming that it was in my father's best interest. "This was never about love," Bianca's voice rang out from the speakers. "It was about securing my future. Raphael's estate is my ticket, and I'm going to make sure that Natalia is kept in her place." The room was eerily quiet as the tape played out. I could see the colour drain from Bianca's face. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. But there was nowhere to run. The evidence was out in the open. "How do you explain this, Bianca?" Gregory asked, his voice firm. "Your own words, confessing to manipulating the situation for your personal gain." Bianca's jaw clenched. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She opened her mouth to speak but faltered, unsure of how to deflect the impact of the evidence. Finally, she straightened her back, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice strained. I've been nothing but supportive of Raphael. I've always acted in his best interests. This recording doesn't prove anything. That's not all, Gregory said as he slid a document across the table, in the prenuptial agreement. Bianca's eyes widened. Her lawyer's expression shifted from smug confidence to something less certain. The prenuptial agreement detailed Bianca's rights, including the full inheritance of the estate upon Raphael's passing, despite his declining health. It had a clause about ensuring Bianca's financial security no matter what, while effectively cutting me out. Your prenuptial agreement is evidence of your intentions to control everything, Gregory said. This wasn't about love. It was about securing your position and manipulating a man in a vulnerable state to get it. The mediator glanced at the documents, then back at Bianca, who now seemed visibly shaken. Her calm facade was cracking. She glanced at Raphael, who was staring blankly ahead, unable to process what was happening. But there was one more piece of the puzzle, one final weapon that would tip the scales in my favour. Gregory handed over the medical report, the neurologist's evaluation of my father's mental state. The doctor had confirmed what I already suspected. Raphael's dementia was not just early stage. It was significant enough that he could no longer make informed decisions without assistance. And yet, Bianca had been acting as though he were perfectly capable, all the while controlling his decisions without anyone noticing. The room fell silent as the report was passed around. The weight of its truth hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Bianca, I said softly, my voice steady despite the anger that burned in my chest. You've been exploiting my father's condition. You've been manipulating him, using his illness to get what you want. Bianca's face turned a deep shade of red, and for a moment I saw something other than the cool, calculating woman I had come to despise. I saw fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. I did what was necessary to protect us, she stammered, but the words sounded hollow, desperate. Raphael needed me. He's not well, Natalia. I've been taking care of him. He would have wanted this. You don't understand. But I wasn't listening anymore. Her excuses were just that. Excuses, and I wasn't buying it. The mediation didn't last much longer after that. The mediator quickly realized the overwhelming evidence on my side, and after a tense pause, he announced that he would recommend the invalidation of the current will. Bianca's manipulation had been laid bare, and there was no coming back from that. I'm sorry, Bianca, the mediator said, his tone impartial but firm. Based on the evidence presented, I am recommending that the will be invalidated and that the estate be re-evaluated in light of Raphael's true wishes. I watched as Bianca's face contorted with rage, her eyes burned with frustration, and her fists clenched at her sides. She stood up abruptly, glaring at me with pure venom. This isn't over, Natalia, she hissed. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. I had won. The truth had come to light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. Justice had been served. As the session ended and we walked out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. Bianca's plans had unravelled, and for once the manipulation she had so carefully constructed had fallen apart. I turned to look at my father, who still sat there, confused but no longer under her control. He might not fully understand what had happened, but I knew in my heart that I had fought for him, for both of us. And, in the end, the truth had won. As we stepped out of the mediation room and into the crisp afternoon air, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile, fleeting kind that comes from denial or distraction, but the deep, grounding peace that comes after a storm has passed. Bianca had stormed out not long after the ruling, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. Her mask had slipped, her games exposed, and though my father remained quiet beside me, his mind still cloudy, still tangled in the confusion of what had transpired, I felt the bond between us begin to stir again, like sunlight breaking through a fog. I reached for his hand. He didn't say much, but he held it. and that was enough. I hadn't just fought a legal battle, I had fought for my father's memory, for his honour, and for the version of our family that she had tried to rewrite. Bianca's manipulation could have rewritten our history if I hadn't stood up. If I hadn't listened to my instincts and refused to be erased. But I did. Quietly. Strategically. Without screaming or drama. Just the truth, laid bare with proof and precision. In the weeks that followed, I took steps to rebuild. The estate was no longer hers to sell, and the prenuptial clause she had tried to bury had become her undoing. I made sure the necessary protections were put in place, not just to secure my father's future care, but to ensure no one could ever exploit him again. People started calling me brave, but that wasn't the word I would have chosen. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just a daughter, one who had refused to let her father be forgotten, who had fought like hell to hold on to the truth when everything else was slipping away. This story wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about reclaiming what matters: dignity, justice, and family. Sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, unseen. And that's okay. There are people in this world who will try to control the narrative, twist reality, and use charm as a weapon. But no matter how clever their manipulation, truth always has a way of pushing through. If you're patient, if you're smart, and if you're willing to fight for it. I didn't get back everything I lost, but I got back the most important part: my voice, my power, my future. And for anyone out there who's been pushed aside, who feels like their trib being silenced or erased, I hope this story reminds you are not powerless. Your instincts matter, and with enough courage, even the most carefully constructed lies can be dismantled. If you found this story powerful, inspiring, or simply worth your time, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your own stories of standing up for what's right. Let's keep this conversation going and build a space where justice, truth, and resilience are celebrated. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful echoes.